If you enjoy what we do, please support the channel by giving the video a like. There was once a world outside our own. It wasn't very different. You could find supermarkets, dating apps, and cheap flights with rude flight attendants. People walking their dogs, worrying about that strange noise coming from the muffler of their struggling Honda Civic. They had it changed just 2 months ago. What are the odds of that thing breaking again? But things changed. Slowly at first. Some say it started with spots in the night sky where stars looked different. Others said it was lightning strikes that would stick to the clouds for minutes at a time. But those in the know would know the truth. It really started with a peculiar blue sunflower blooming in a place where it shouldn't. The world began to break the rules. Basic concepts that we all take for granted. Gravity would shift and shake. Time itself would jump ahead and lag behind. There were lights in the depths of the sea, making ocean life spin in maddening circles, dancing a choreographed piece that no one had taught them. There was panic, doomsday cults, riots in the streets. Fundamental concepts would break, and the effects would grow more severe in rapid succession. You could walk down the street a teenager and come out the other side an old man, could be thrown into the sky and fall to their deaths 2 towns over. The government wasn't surprised. The unraveling had been ongoing for years, and they had done their best to prepare. They'd worked on ways to send people across dimensional lines, hoping to find more stable lands to settle. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. There was a particular substance that could be refined from the leftover matter of dimensional ripples. They managed to refine it into a metal and weave it into protective gear. They used it to create a dimensional anchor suit. It would settle the wearer into a stasis position, making them effectively immortal. It was the only thing powerful enough to send people across the unraveling dimensional lines. However, this wasn't an exact science. There needed to be an initial test. There would come a time when they managed to stabilize the tech enough to send people through without the suits. But by then, billions would be dead. A handful of people would turn into dimensional refugees. But long before then, there was that first person to take a leap of faith. That's who this story's about. Geraldine Jordan worked on a lot of government projects. She was a combat pilot known for her willingness to experiment and expand. She was dedicated, honest, loyal, and first and foremost, available. When they needed that first person to put on the suit and step through the gate, Geraldine was the first to come to mind. Once that dimensional portal was open, there would be no way to tell what was going to happen. So to be safe, they decided to perform the initial run on the spaceship Resolution, well out of our atmosphere. That way, if something unintended stepped through, at least it would be isolated. Come launch day, Geraldine was strapped into the protective suit. It had a completely ink-black cover, like dry gelatin, interlaced with a metal weave that rippled in anticipation of her movements, making her every step look like the shadow of something that had already happened. It looked like the suit was wearing her, and not the other way around. Geraldine was going to step into this rudimentary space vessel with an untested dimensional portal, wearing an experimental stasis suit. None of this was tested. Everything was based on speculation, desperation, and cutthroat mad genius-type breakthroughs that came at the cost of hundreds of lives. The most brutal and cruel flavor of altruism. For Geraldine, things weren't so bad. There was her family cheering for her from the launch pad, people holding signs, live streams from various institutions around the world, wishing her all the best. Also, the suit was comfortable. Despite it covering her completely, it didn't impede her vision. It was like wearing a one-sided mirror. Also, it made her feel light. She kept making these little jumps, thinking she could see herself floating. It was curious, but not unpleasant. She was nervous, of course, but she had never been let down before. She and the suit had passed all the tests. They could withstand however many Gs the machines could put her through. She could take a gunshot to the chest without spilling a drop of blood. She could stay underwater for hours. In every simulation, she came out unscathed. In theory, she could survive the vacuum of space itself. They'd done 2 test launches with plenty of margin for error. The power required to run the dimensional brake was immense, so it would only be open for a couple of seconds. She'd practiced the maneuver hundreds of times. Click the button, count to 2, step through. There was a rhyme to it, made it simple, but they could only account for so many errors. If it hadn't been for a twist of fate, things would have gone fine. But there was a time dilation effect over the launch site for about zero point 0.3 seconds. You could only notice it from the outside. These effects would come and go, one of the many features of a collapsing dimension, but it was just zero point 0.3 seconds. The launch went perfectly fine. People could see the vessel for miles, rising like a reverse shooting star. Geraldine Jordan watched the clouds give way to the darkness of the endless, leaving her weightless in her seat. She had prepared for this moment, and she was ready for come what may. She would step through that portal and become the first person in the promised land, a chance for everyone to start over, for things to get better. So she grasped the controls. She flipped the protective plastic and pressed once to prime the generators. She let the suit provide her oxygen as she took a deep breath. Her form floated forward as she pressed the button. But something curious happened. Problem was that the dilation effect was in reverse. Everything happened a little quicker than it ought to. To the naked eye, it just seemed like instruments and gauges reacted faster than anticipated. However, the portal engaged exactly zero point 0.3 seconds before she even pressed the button, meaning the portal was already activated the moment she actually pressed the button. The conflicting signals caused an overload, short-circuiting the firing mechanism, causing a cascade of power failures. Geraldine floated forward expecting to step through to another place, but instead bumped into the frame of the inactive portal. It was a sleek chrome, casting a distorted reflection back at her. She looked strange in that suit. Maybe it was the shape of the glass-like circus, like a funhouse mirror. She barely looked human. "CENTCOM, what's going on?" she asked. "SITREP." The voice on the other end came through, a project supervisor huffing into the microphone. "Jordan!" he yelled, abandoning protocol. "Jordan, why'd you push it twice?" "I pressed it once." "What are you talking about?" "You press the charge, then you engage. You don't spam it like a goddamn arcade machine." "I'm not spamming shit, CENTCOM. I did exactly what you told me to." "Our diagnostics say different, Jordan." "You... God, what?" She could feel the blood rushing to her cheeks. Her glorious moment had been pulled from under her feet. She hit the side of the portal frame, but all it did was reverberate with a gentle hum. They tried to talk her through manual repairs, but there was no way to do it. The parts needed to fix the power supply had to be handcrafted by a team of specialists. It would take weeks. Problem was, Jordan was drifting. The same power that was supposed to start the portal was also meant to slow her ascent into a stable orbit. Now it had misfired, instead leading her further and further out from our pale blue dot. Even if they could get the parts needed to fix it, it would take months to create something that could get it to her. And by then, she would be too far away to receive it. They spent hours turning the problem every which way. At one point, the project supervisor just cut off the comms entirely, leaving Geraldine in the literal dark of space. She didn't dare to look back. She didn't want to know how far out she'd gotten. "They got this," she whispered. "They got this. They always know what to do." But something in her mind whispered something else. It whispered that things were different this time, that these people were not to be trusted, that you can only trust people to a point, and that when things really matter, they disappoint you. "I disagree," Geraldine mumbled. "They come through in the end." But the other voice wasn't convinced. They agreed to disagree. Shortly after, the comms came back online. "Talk to me, CENTCOM," Geraldine said. "I need some good news." There was someone on the other end, but the voice was getting distant and distorted. Static crawled through her internal speakers, like the sound of tearing paper. Geraldine could hear them breathing, but there were no words. There was nothing to say. "Come on, CENTCOM," she continued. "Talk to me, please." "There's no good way to say this," a voice came through barely. "You messed up. You messed up bad." I didn't. You know I didn't. It was a button press. It was just. Saying it out loud made it all real. So real. A stone sank into her chest, and every word that didn't lift it just made it dip further and further down. We can twist and turn it any way we want. Let's say you did things perfectly. You're amazing. You're absolutely blameless in this. That does not change the reality of our situation. And what is that? What is that situation? We have steering rockets, but even at maximum throttle, we can only adjust the course about 20 degrees. Apart from that, we've got nothing. So we got 20 degrees, Geraldine laughed. Let's pump those numbers up. Dina, you're not getting it. You said 20. I can make it 40. It's not done until it's done. It can't be done. And in about 6 hours, you'll be out of range. Out of range for what? A sigh came through. In the silence between words, Geraldine felt her beating heart. She could still sense a voice underneath, whispering to her. This was exactly what it had warned her about. For everything, comms, remote control, all of it. You'll be a floating wreck. I'm sorry. So we got 6 hours. I can work with that. I'm sorry. No, please, I can't just... Dina, I'm sorry. But you can't leave me here to... Her voice broke, mimicking the crackle of the struggling communications array. She bit her lip and let her pain out in a sob. I don't know what the fuck to think, CENTCOM, but I know you were going to stay with me every step of the way, and now you're saying that's a step too far. Which is it? I am sorry, I don't know what to do. They argued, they cried together. But after 6 hours, those comms would die, and they would die 0.3 seconds earlier than anticipated. Geraldine had cried for the first time in years. Bawling like a child, she pulled out every panel, checked every connection. She kicked the booster rockets into a full turn, hoping the whiplash could put her into a kind of reverse spin. All it did was set her into a slow rotation. If she squinted out the front window, it looked like the entire universe revolved around her. It was a comforting thought, like the universe itself was correcting itself to apologize to the blameless victim. 6 hours turned to 12, turned to 20. Lights flickered and died as temperatures and pressures would drop. And yet Geraldine didn't feel anything. The suit held her tight, keeping her perfectly comfortable. That worried her. If the ship broke apart, she'd still be there. She would float through the nothingness of space for as long as there'd be time. Or she could take it off. At least that's what she thought. She hadn't tried taking it off for a while. This was by far her longest session wearing it, but taking it off meant abandoning all hope and submitting to nothingness. Was nothingness really better than pain and isolation? After all, pain is something. Something is always better than nothing. You can adapt to something, turn it into something else. But dying? That's nothing. Some whirring mechanism stopped, perhaps a cooling fan. Geraldine didn't care. She was floating around, curled into a fetal position. She was trying to make her life flash before her eyes, but she couldn't. She was too alive in her suit, making her body refuse to accept the reality of the situation. She could kick and scream all she wanted, and it would do nothing. It wouldn't even tire her out. What if we just stop thinking, she said out loud. We could enjoy the ride. Let ourselves become a brain mush. The voice behind her heart didn't think that was such a bad idea. It was better than eternal nothing, but perhaps she could try something else. What? She asked. Try what? Taking off a little piece, like a glove, just to see what would happen. Sure, Geraldine sighed. Why the hell not? One of her gloves slipped off. It was thinner than silk, and even back on Earth it had weighed little to nothing. In the emptiness of space, that glove might as well have been nothing. She observed her hand as a sudden pain crept into her nerves. She tried moving her fingers, only to feel something snap and break. Her hand was freezing from the void, trying to send pain signals for her to adhere to, but it didn't work as intended. Instead, her hand ended up frozen solid, without her feeling a thing. She slipped the glove back on, and in a matter of minutes, her hand was perfectly fine. "What's this good for?" she panted. "Another way to feel pain?" The voice remarked that it could change properties. It could make her feel pain all the time if she wanted. It could change other things too. Yeah? What kind of things? The voice told her about little things, seeing new colors, tasting new tastes. It was very versatile and eager to help. "I'll take that into consideration." The voice knew she would. It could understand her pretty well. She was so clever, more so than she gave herself credit for. Geraldine couldn't tell how much time had passed. She knew that every rotation of the vessel took about 1 minute and 23 seconds, but there was no point in counting. In the vastness of infinity, a day or a year is just a number. She thought about everything for a while, reviewing all the memories she could muster in a sort of mental slideshow. Her first memory, her first kiss. She would hyperfixate on little details like the taste of the plastic fork she'd used at her mother's dinner table. Little sensations forever burned into her unconscious mind, brought to the surface. She would stop blinking, breathing. She didn't need oxygen in her lungs. The suit provided all. She didn't need to blink. Her eyes didn't dry. It was all just maintenance, and she had no need for such things. Instead, she floated back and forth, imagining the many wonders of her life as they played out before her in a mind gallery. But after a while, she'd seen that gallery. She'd seen it 5 times or more, 10 times, 100. There were no more sensations to review. Some of them started to fade from memory. This, if anything, terrified her. She needed to feel human again, so she asked the voice for a favor. "I want to feel," she said. "Turn yourself off for a while. Let me feel. But don't let it kill me. Not yet." The voice obliged and held its immaterial breath. There was a lightning bolt of pain as the temperature of her body dropped. Her lungs had atrophied, but there was no oxygen to breathe anyway. It reminded her of a particularly deep dive she'd done back when she was part of the swim team. She would always press herself a little too hard, going a little too far. But that's what made her the best, throwing herself into something no one thought she could do. Not even herself at times. It was the worst pain she'd ever felt, and it was the sweetest. As her vision darkened, relief came creeping back as the suit reactivated. Geraldine bounced from wall to wall. She was comfortable again, but she still felt the need to move and warm herself. "Yes," she called out. "I was the best. I was leading the way from the front." The voice was so proud of her. She really was the best. It couldn't have asked for a better partner. "Maybe I can get better," Geraldine said. "Maybe I can, I don't know, exercise, adapt." The voice liked that. It thought she was making some good points. It would help her, if possible. It turned into a kind of training regimen. She would turn the suit on and off, exposing herself to freezing temperatures and vacuum pressures over and over again. After a while, she forgot she was doing it. The suit had covered her body in scabs and scar tissue that would grow and fatten in response, allowing her to stay without the protection of the suit for longer and longer. Even though it looked horrible, Geraldine was happy. She was feeling something. She was changing something. It was something else, away from the nothing. She didn't slow down. The agony would come and go. It's not that it wasn't there. She would just get better at handling it. At one point, she could see her body go through a cycle as boils and cysts would grow, freeze, and break off, leaving room for more to grow in their place. As the suit reactivated, Geraldine had a curious thought. She saw these little bits and pieces of herself float around the vessel. It was a physical thing now, separate from her. How unusual. They were things made from her. "Just how much can we change?" she asked the voice. The voice was intrigued. It could change her a lot. If time wasn't a factor, it could change her in any way she wanted. Time passes differently in a vacuum. Geraldine looked out and didn't recognize the stars. But then again, maybe the stars were the same. Maybe her eyes were different. Even without the influence of the suit, she could feel calluses forming on her face. When she held her hand up, it looked swollen and gray, like the ship itself had seeped into her skin. This wasn't change she'd asked for. It was entropy. How long had she been out there? A couple of days? A week? A month? The voice reassured her. It had tried to reach others before, but had never been heard. Geraldine had been the first, and it cared for her a great deal. If she concentrated enough, and if she could imagine a change in herself, it could happen. All she would need to do was shed the old to make way for the new. If she pulled her hair out, the next string of hair would be a new color. If she pulled a tooth, she could get a sharper one. This gave Geraldine an uncomfortable idea. She let one of her fingers freeze in the vacuum, then broke it off with a snap. A powerful spike shot through her body like an electric shock, making her gasp for air. Air that she didn't need, and that her lungs would have rejected. The sting faded as the finger grew back. Geraldine tried to imagine the finger being a little longer and thinner. She repeated the process again, and again, and again. Pain, pain, pain. After a while, she had a dozen broken fingers. Comparing the first and the last, there was about half an inch in size difference. "Can we change other things?" she asked the voice. "Can we change blood? Sweat?" The voice was curious about her intention, and it reassured her. They could change anything, or it would just take time and sacrifice. Geraldine stabbed herself with a hollow metal pipe, making a sort of blood tap. That way she could continuously bleed while the suit replenished her. If she concentrated enough, she could, in theory, change the makeup of her own bodily fluids. She tried to imagine the sodium and chlorine in her blood becoming more conductive, hardening. All the while, the drops spilling out of her were enough to send her into a cautious, weightless spiral, making her body roll around the ship like a lawn sprinkler. The inside of the ship was soon covered in so much coagulated blood that she could no longer see the outside. It didn't matter much to her. If anything, the universe felt like a mockery. It was demeaning to her. All that opportunity and exploration, full of nothing. Seeing it was no more exciting than closing her eyes. It was the same sensation, the same scale. Darkness. Her blood would start to look different. There was a little more, and it was a little thicker. She would feel no different, of course. If anything, it felt strange when the bleeding stopped. It did once, when the pipe clogged. There was a sort of coagulate buildup on the inside. In response, Geraldine got more pipes and stabbed them all into her back. She would create a rotation where she would clean them, one by one, making herself into a macabre human clock. The lights had gone out long ago. The vessel was never meant to survive this long. It was supposed to be a short trip, a small step. Instead, it spiraled on, leaving Geraldine in the eternal dark of an eternal void. But with her calloused hands, she would feel the outline of the inner ship. She could feel those light bulbs, and she wanted to change something. "I'll bring the lights back," she said. "I can do that. I can bring the lights back." At first, she thought she could shape her coagulated blood into a sort of stalactite. It didn't work. It was too hard to control and far too imprecise. She needed something soft, stretchy, and flexible. Geraldine broke off a piece of the instrument panel, scratching and shaping it into a makeshift knife. With it, she began the painstaking process of removing her blood vessels. She would fail. Even in her hardened state, the sensation was so alien that it could not be ignored. The pain was always there, but it was more of a nuisance than anything. It was much worse to nick a nerve. The sudden spasms would force her to start over, but she would keep at it, taking regular breaks, allowing the suit to make her whole. She would fail. She would give up. She would start again. This Sisyphean task kept sending her boulder back down the hill, but she knew for a fact that it wasn't impossible. She could feel, and most important of all, the voice would tell her so. At one point, everything looked like blood. A long string of red stretched from her shaking arm to a single bulb. She'd imagined herself as a battery. A hand covered in stone-like nodules pressed the red string against the connector of the bulb, praying that she had changed enough to make a difference. "Please," she whispered, "please bring me light." The voice begged along with her. Something had to give. Something had to change. She pressed her fingers harder, and there was light. She could barely see it. So many layers covered her unblinking eyes, leaving the bulb as a butter-like blemish in the dark. But it worked. As long as it stayed connected to her, it worked. She repeated the process, getting steadier and more precise with a blade. Soon she could pull longer blood vessels. She would avoid the nerves. She could pull one out, heal the wound, and pull another. Over and over and over. She would float around the vessel exposed, red strings following her like the loose strings of a Victorian dress. A light would come back as one connection completed, then another, a diode on the instrument panel, little sparks of life at her command. She tried to laugh, but there was no air to fill her lungs. "We can change us," she said. "We really can. Look." She spun around. One or two lights would turn off from the reckless shift, but most of them would just sway and float. She imagined herself like a bioluminescent jellyfish, floating through the darkest pit of the ocean. The voice was so proud. It was convinced of the many great things she could do, and it reiterated its promise to help at all costs. In a moment of clarity, Geraldine stopped to think. The voice hadn't lied to her as of yet, but was it telling the entire truth? And if it didn't, did it matter? "I have a question," she said. The voice was intrigued. "How exactly can you put me back together?" "It was no secret," the voice assured. "There were many Geraldines in many places. They all had blood and nerves and skin. The voice came from the space between those places. To fix her, it simply reached out and grasped another Geraldine, taking whatever it needed to put her back together." "What happens to the others?" she asked. The voice thought it was obvious. The others couldn't live without those things. They would die so she could live. They'd gone through tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of Geraldines by now. But in the scale of the infinite, what did it matter? Geraldine wanted to be angry. She really did. But in another way, she couldn't help but think that maybe the others were the lucky ones. They weren't taunted by the possibility of survival. They had their choice made for them. How comforting. She would get more invasive. She would break and strengthen her bones, only to rip them out and shape them into tools and support structures. She fashioned needles from her finger bones, scissors from her shin bone, a hammer from a femur. Ceaseless, inhuman torture, numbed and forgotten. She would change the lining of her skin into a mild adhesive for repairs, her saliva into lubricant, giving it the texture of fish oil. She would turn the main cabin of the vessel into a reflection of her literal inner body, highlighted by whatever scrap and electronics remained. The voice kept her mind occupied. It reminded her that none of this was her fault. She was blameless in this. And if she considered her situation logically, this proves something about people as a whole. "It does?" Geraldine asked. "Pray tell." "People are finite. Humanity as a whole was finite, but the suffering and pain they could inflict was infinite. It wasn't fair for something fleeting to affect something permanent, at least not mathematically. If I can just get back home, all will be forgiven," she said. "All will be well." The voice agreed. Maybe all would be fine. Then again, maybe it wouldn't be. Maybe for this one person, suffering really was infinite. If so, it would still be there, long after all the people were gone. Geraldine would use herself for various components, requiring more invasive procedures. She had never worked on a ship like this before, but she had faith that she could change herself just enough to better understand things. After all, if her recovery was made from pieces of other Geraldines, maybe she could direct herself to be repaired with the mind of a rocket scientist. The voice thought it was brilliant. If she only took out a little piece of her brain, that might be enough. "How come I can't hear your voice?" Geraldine asked. "I can feel it, but I can't hear it." The voice wondered if she thought she was really speaking. "Aren't I?" She was not. She had not been able to speak for quite some time. In fact, most of her facial features had morphed and atrophied. Her tongue was swollen and hard. Speaking was like trying to smack two rocks together. "I still feel like I'm speaking," thought Geraldine. "Can I change back?" The voice wasn't sure. It thought she could, but it would take time. and first she would have to come home. Yes, Geraldine agreed. Home. With every modification to her body and ship, Geraldine resembled less and less of a human being. She would create battery packs from acidic hearts, pumping a modified solution through a series of intestinal tubes. When the final light died, she made a bioluminescent organ to replace it. All it took was time and thoughts. The suit would do the rest. And finally, she would connect her brain to the mainframe. She could feel something changing, a word disappearing, a thought, a memory, or a smell. But at the end of every line was a change from something into something else. And in that moment, there would be new light. A red light on the mainframe would turn green. A 0 would turn to a 1 as her body learned to interface with the machine. She would change herself in infinitesimal ways, fusing herself with the remaining electronics. And at some point, there was more of Geraldine outside herself than inside. And yet, she would keep going. She would repair, and things would continue. One day, she wasn't floating around the main cabin. She wasn't really moving at all. Or perhaps she was. It was hard to tell where the ship stopped and she began. Her nerves were integrated with the sensors. She could see more with the communications array than with her eyes. She could feel more from hull reports than her rock-like skin. She could feel hundreds of pulses as a steering rocket hummed to life, burning fuel she had painstakingly borne from her stomach. The rotation of the ship had slowed. A screen came online, helping her plot a course. A part of her mind had designed a way to navigate the foreign stars. Another part of her brain could understand the throttle power of rockets. But a part of her original mind remained. The part that wanted to go home. The part that knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that she was blameless in all of this. She had done nothing to deserve this. Nothing. And one day Geraldine used a practiced thought to plot a course for home. She was happy, but her mouth could not smile. She sailed across the stars toward familiar skies. Neptune, Mars, Saturn. They would pass by like raindrops in a storm. By the end of the longest day, she sensed a pale blue dot in the distance. Home. Geraldine thought it was curious. She thought she had been gone for billions of years, but from what she could gather, it was, at most, 2. The voice explained that perhaps time works differently for those wearing the stasis suit. Not that Geraldine was wearing it anymore. It was bundled up somewhere in the core of her physical self, replacing the true place of a heart. It was all just details. It wouldn't matter soon enough. She would come home, blameless and perfect. Those on the ground couldn't understand what they were seeing. There was no way for them to tell it was Geraldine Jordan and the spaceship Resolution entering their orbit. For all intents and purposes, it was just an unusual meteor. People across the Midwest watched it fall, burning across the sky. Geraldine felt all of it. The endless fires and the effort to keep herself together. Every exposed nerve, every broken bone, everyone's struggling organ. It was all engulfed in flames, but the suit would keep enough of her alive all the way past the clouds. And somewhere in a forest in rural Minnesota, what remained of Geraldine Jordan made landfall. She could not stand on her legs. Maybe she didn't have them anymore. The air burned her just as badly as the fire. Moisture would make her skin crackle and sear. After all this time, she had become maladapted to the environment she was meant to live in. But she was home. There were soldiers and helicopters. There were spotlights and screams and weapons. The Geraldine thing would fumble and move, spilling out of her metal casing. The soldiers were there to see her, she thought, to welcome her back. They could finally admit that she had been blameless in all this, and that they could make things right. They would. They had to make it right. They always knew what to do. It's going to be okay, she thought. But then there was fire, napalm, white phosphorus, whatever they could find. To the soldiers, Geraldine was an abomination that had to be destroyed. There was no argument to be had. There was nothing human left to save. And the most peculiar thing happened. Her wounds did not heal. Put me back, she thought. Put me back together. But the voice couldn't. It had run out of Geraldine's. How can you run out? We are infinite. There will always be more. But that wasn't the case. There could only be so many Geraldines. At some point, they stopped being a Geraldine, instead turning into something else. If she had been born a boy, she would have been a Gerald. Could that still be considered Geraldine? I don't care about names and semantics, she cried. I don't care where you take it from. I deserve to live. I deserve to be made whole. The fires roared and spread. Her voice echoed as a gargling shriek, booming across the pine forest. The voice was beyond itself with grief, trying to do whatever it could to help. It would find an arm, a patch of skin, whatever it could, but it was not enough to save her. Geraldine imagined her eyes closed. Consider this, she thought. I am part of my mother and father. They are part of me, and I am part of them. And they have mothers and fathers in turn. I may have siblings. I may have cousins. Are they not partly me? The voice agreed. Part of it was her. And imagine this across the countless dimensions where you have been, where you have taken to preserve me. The voice considered this. An appendage the size of a sedan turned to charcoal and fell off Geraldine, and she felt nothing. There could only be so much pain to feel. My breaths are in the lungs of lovers. My blood may be inside my children. My very image is burned into the mind of bystanders passing me on the street. Those are all me. Those are all mine. As the fire raged, Geraldine stretched and bellowed. Terrified men and women recoiled from the alien craft. She had fought so hard to come home, and this was the welcome she'd get. Maybe the voice was right. Maybe it was inherently unbalanced for a finite kind to cause infinite hardship. And you, voice, she continued, we exist together. We are one and the same. And you are in all these places, in all these people. You are between spaces. Bring those pieces. She was in everything, everyone, everywhere. If the voice could see that and agree, she would be endless. It's all mine, and I want it back. I am blameless. I deserve more. Her heart would beat a final time. One more thought would press itself through a dying mind, crystallized to perfection. I hate them, the voice agreed. They had a similar view, and it would take a leap of faith in her. She could finally see what it wanted her to see, that people deserved to be hated. Across countless places and times, things would change. A man would cough, losing his breath. A woman would feel a tightness of her skin. Nothing big, just a little something here and there. And in their place, a microscopic something would remain. A piece of something inhuman that had come to an understanding with something equally inhuman. The voice would grant everything, pieces of itself, of family, friends, lovers, children, even strangers on the street. Geraldine would soar. Boundless flesh spilled out, enveloping that forest in rural Minnesota. No amount of helicopters or gunfire or hand grenades could make a dent in the deluge of meat that poured from seemingly nowhere. Whatever it touched would become hers, and in turn, it would become her. It was hers, all of it, and she deserved it. She was blameless. Her blood would interface with electronics, listening to devices across the world. She would find them all. She would kill because she deserved to kill. She would cut herself into pieces, spreading like deathless trees across an increasingly barren landscape. And she herself would become a creature to rival the size of mountains. She was to become everything. Long after her rage had devoured and destroyed everything that distant place had to offer, all that would remain was a world of her creation, where time and gravity would break and reform across a dead dimension, where she would rule alone. But there would be other places, places where her beloved voice had reached, but not her touch. And in those places, strange things would happen. A house might grow teeth. A dead boy might breathe air into rust. Creatures would form in the darkest depths of the ocean, intelligent enough to rival the reign of humanity. It might start with the peculiar color of a sunflower, but it would always blossom into unearthly agony. Geraldine was blameless, and she would seep into so many things. Even here, she could reach them. In those places, little rules would break, and the veil between one place to another would grow thin. Geraldine would stay in the charred remains of that distant Minnesota forest, stretching to pull the stars down. She deserved them all. In another place and time, that forest would be a town that she would reach for, just as she reached for everywhere else. She was breaking through, and the little men would burn her with acid and flame. They would scream and beg and cry as all their alarms bleated like dying sheep. They were going to try so very, very hard. But she would continue to reach, across time, across space. She hated them all. She was blameless.